Starting. All right. The Hangout is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
I am Mike McTeen.
Tonight, we're going to be catching up on Survivor Ghost Island, the first 3 hours worth, the first 2 weeks worth, because it was 2 hours for that first night. Our brief apologies that we didn't have our pre-show or the weekly episode last week, just because competing vacation schedules slash travel slash busy made it impossible.
There was some illness in there.
Yeah.
Some fatigue, some travel, some work. Yeah, it's just basically all of the things that could make it so you don't record.
Yeah, and they just
happened.
They lined up several weeks in a row where it was just one thing after another. Anyway, here we are now, still intending to talk about Survivor Ghost Island, and I think in this episode we're going to go ahead and try to get caught up to current, and so we're off.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the expense of maybe moving a little faster than we would normally, but I think it's early on, so
yeah.
But overall, first impression is I'm enjoying the people that they have on here, and I'm enjoying the concept, even though we haven't seen a ton. I mean, there's been a little bit of execution of it, but I like what they've been doing. I like where it's going. I like the mechanism so far.
Yeah.
I was a little frustrated that they shook the tribes up so early, but that is less about the actual show, but more in that my sister is good friends with Morgan, who was the third person voted off, and works with her, and so I was rooting for her going into this season. She seemed to be really doing well as you can be at the beginning. I mean, she was athletic, did well in challenges, socially engaged, thinking through things without overplaying her hand, really, at least until it shook up. So I thought she was in a good position, and then the chaos, and then some poor decisions, I feel like, by people who I don't necessarily respect as much. In particular, James, I think his name is.
Well, I mean, there is a James.
Well, he was the one that decided that they couldn't go with the Dominic plan because he might have created a fake idol to hide his real idol that he was hiding from them and showing them the fake idol.
Well, except technically speaking, he is actually right about that.
But he wouldn't have played it, is the thing. And so.
Well, yeah, but.
Remember, I got it. When you have some fandom, you always skew a little bit, and this one's even more than just.
Well, so I remembered you had told me that your sister was friends with one of the people in the cast, but when watching these episodes, I hadn't remembered, or you hadn't told me yet which one it was. So I didn't have that in my head when watching, but I did like Morgan, and it was kind of a bummer for her to go, especially since this is one of those unfortunate times where her getting voted out was really not even about her. It was really just kind of tidal forces.
It was like, well, we've in all of our discussions, we've narrowed it down to, we can't do all of these things, so we have to pick between an A and a B, and she was the A.
Yeah.
And so yes, it was frustrating because it didn't seem like she was putting herself in a position for that to happen. One of the things, I was going to say whether we get to it then or now, but I guess we just talk through it now, is that she's very optimistic. My sister has spoken to her that maybe she might get to participate, even though she was a very short-lived contestant, because of how engaging she was. She's got a really good outpouring on social media, at least from her perspective. And again, she may be, based on having no social media presence in her normal life to what it looks like, and and people not hating her. It might be skewed, but you saw on the show, she seems to be just a pretty optimistic person to begin with. So
I think this is definitely not a case where some people get voted out early because they obviously did something dumb or they were grading or anything like that. She seems smart and personable, and so like I was sorry to see her go, especially because kind of like we said, it wasn't even really about her. It was just it was by default through process of elimination.
Right. And we also know that part of what brings you back on one of those fan favorite shows is not only do you have to be a fan favorite, but you have to be willing and able to do the show again, which not everybody is.
Right. So yeah, I would definitely be hopeful, like maybe she could get to be on another season. That would be.
Or maybe something crazy happens on this season.
Well, who knows? That's true. Like this is not Game Changers, but it's also about bringing back cursed things and reversing the curse and all of that. So who knows?
Well, and again, just out of my hopeful own optimism, it's Redemption Island was fairly cursed at some of those. Like you could pick a couple of people who basically they came back from Redemption Island and they just got voted out again because they were the easy target, being that they had been voted off already. Like how easy to just maintain your decision to have voted this person off, and that's why Redemption Island had to go away eventually. And so maybe there becomes an opportunity to reverse it. And again, it doesn't mean that she would be the one that would somehow get it, but I'm optimistic to see her again because I was rooting for her, and this kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've since convinced my sister to stick with the show, but they were going to lose. Not that it's just one viewer, but I started to really get into it. Never watched Survivor before, knew that we liked it.
Mm-hmm.
And so after every, like, whenever she would watch every episode, she would like live text me and be like, this is unbelievable. Like they're so mean to each other. And like, how do they, that's the surviving part, is surviving the other people, like the physically surviving. Yeah. Like, there's the tired element we've always talked about that strips you down, makes you more at your base level, and you have to deal with that. But it's not like you're not actually surviving, because they have a whole mechanism in place to make sure that you survive.
Right. Yeah. Nobody's going to die.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, certainly not through the conditions, right? Like it would be, obviously you could have a horrible accident or something. I'm not sure why I'm even going down that road, but the point is, yes, it is not about survival in the wilderness in the classic sense. And in fact, I mean, this season, even though they kind of made a point at the beginning of them not actually getting even as much supplies as normal, but at the same time, they've also not had terribly harsh conditions so far. So it's, I mean, at least so far in this season, they haven't really even had to endure all that much yet.
Yep.
But so let's talk about, let's go ahead and rewind back to the beginning. We get assigned 2 tribes, orange and purple. Orange is Malolo and purple is Navidi. And even though they've mixed it up already, it's still those 2 tribe names. Let's see. So they, the very first thing that they do, I kind of liked the idea of having each tribe pick a captain and then having the captain pick people to do the physical versus the puzzle parts of the challenge. I thought that was kind of just a neat sort of pseudo-tactical way to start off. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I say pseudo-tactical because they really don't know enough about anyone yet to really make anything other than just total snap decisions. I suppose you can choose someone for physical based on, they look buff, but that doesn't really.
Interesting of like, the fact that, Chris just sort of decided he was going to be the one, and no one really stood in his way, versus like Malolo, like just, being a little more like everybody suggesting Brendan and him accepting it. So you just see a little bit about their personality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm not questioning that so much as the just like the tactical element. Although I guess the whole idea of whether you can, you can, if you think you're going to lose the puzzle, you can forfeit it in order to not lose as much. Like you can keep the fishing gear, but sacrifice flint and eggs.
Right.
And it's interesting too, just in the sense that, it's very clear from the producer's standpoint that the 3 tiers, you have the tools, the fishing gear, and then the flint and eggs. Now, flint and eggs make sense because you're going to get flint eventually when you first go to tribal council, if not before, right? And so and then the eggs, is food, it's like that sort of thing. But like the tools to make the shelter, and then the fishing gear, and then the flint is at the bottom, apparently. So one of the things that I thought was telling, though, is the whole bit. First of all, that you like you mentioned that Chris kind of volunteered himself. There really wasn't much discussion about it, and then he goes up there and Probe asks him, and he says, "Well, I guess they saw something in me." And I'm like, "Did they though? I mean, they didn't stop you. They saw in you that you are the kind of guy who volunteers for leadership positions."
Yeah.
But then also to have Dom at the end express, disagreement with the choice to forfeit the puzzle. And personally, that just was a huge, not red flag. That's not the right. It's a huge just indicator that Dom is just a contrarian personality. Because like, what's to be gained at that point?
Right.
First of all, she was way behind in the puzzle. So what? He is Dom saying we should have let her stick it out and then lose? I mean, maybe, but it's a judgment call. So like to make yourself stand out, it's like, I'm a truth teller, Jeff. I don't lie. In deliberately like stepping out, raising your hand, and being the one person on the tribe to tell everybody, nope, this guy wants to be the leader and I disagree with him. That's a very telling sort of bit there.
Yes.
So other just highlights from that whole first bit. One is that Michael is apparently 18 years old. I never would have guessed. He says he's 23, and I would have believed it. I honestly would have maybe pegged him at older than that.
Yeah, he doesn't. There's nothing about him that you would say. Like, I mean, he has a facial hair and all that. I mean, don't grow that at 18, but it surprised me.
Yeah,
and then it even reminded me of my surprise when he talked about, how the first episode he watched was the one, when James.
Yeah, Survivor China.
Yeah, Survivor China when James had the two idols, and he was like 8 years old at the time or whatever, and it was like, oh, yeah. I was like,
yeah,
wow,
right?
You're young. And I did the math, and I was like, yeah, you are young. Yeah.
Shouldn't be allowed. Let's see. We also we met Donathan, who I kind of I find endearing, but also could imagine that he's got kind of this intense naivete about him that is probably exhausting in person.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great way to describe. I didn't go into as much depth as to my feelings on him. I'm curious about him because he is interesting. But I think it's because of what you described. You can see he's like, yeah, he's endearing. Like, you kind of like it when you see him in confessionals and when it's, the edit like makes sense. But yeah, I can see if he's like that all the time, that could get a little much. Yeah.
Him being really excited to make a black friend and and some of that sort of thing, but at the same time, like, I mean, he's kind of like on the right side of those elements, but it's just one of those things where you kind of go, oh my gosh, this poor kid, where does he grow up that like he's been hurting for social contact. Anyway, though, I think, like I wasn't 100% sure how I felt about him up until when he actually went down and took care of the buoys in the in that later challenge, just because that was an opportunity for him to show his worth, and he did it, and it was great. I thought that was exciting.
And he was so. I mean, and it was like that was where you really got the endearing moment. Like the other parts, I mean, that was the most endearing because you were just you were excited for him, because of how excited he was. So
well, and he did he wasn't a jerk about it, like he was there, and he was kind of like he was reluctant to put himself out there, but then when persuaded to try, he did it and he accomplished it, and then he was kind of humble about it. Like he said in the confessional afterwards, it's like, I'm an okay swimmer, so it wasn't like I was afraid to try it exactly, but there's also just that element of like James seems like he's in really great shape, and he's just utterly failing to do this task repeatedly. I would imagine there's just a little bit of an element of like he probably is used to having to keep his accomplishments to himself in some ways, you know what I mean? So as to not show up the more macho people in his normal environment.
Right.
And so there, turns out that, James is cool about it in that sense, but you could imagine a different sort of person feeling humiliated and wanting to take that out on the person who showed him up. You know what I mean? And so it's not so much that I thought James would do that as much as we could imagine that being in Donathan's head.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. So,
anyway, though, let's see. We've, who else do we meet? We met Sebastian, the fisherman, who, Dominic just insisted, like, well, you're a fisherman and your name is Sebastian and nobody calls you Seabass. And Sebastian's kind of like, no. All right, well, that's your new nickname, Seabass. Okay. You can see him just not pumped about this new nickname. Dom did have, given that he sort of came out really strong out of the gate in terms of being a big personality, it was interesting to see that gain some nuance when he's talking about how he had lost a bunch of weight, and it was all down to like making better decisions, and not just about like exercise and food, but in all sorts of ways. And, having that be about wanting to be there for his kid and all that sort of thing. Like, I mean, that's, hey, respect to that, right? That's a life transformation for good reasons. That's impressive.
Yeah, you like to hear those kind of stories. So,
let's see. We had Sebastian and Chris making friends coming down to their Florida backgrounds, and I was charmed by Sebastian when tossing out an example of things that they might do together if they were friends back in Florida, included picking out gummies for each other. And I was just like, that's amazing. Yes. Sebastian the fisherman picking out gummies for his friend.
I've liked Sebastian as well so far.
Yeah, he seems like a fun guy. And then we have Jacob, who our first real moment of meeting him is when he loses his shoes in the ocean.
Oh, Jacob, yes.
Yeah.
He was not long for this game. You could tell.
Yeah. He was playing hard, and I think we can give him credit for that. But, he was also, I think, he came on too strong, and I think people reacted to that.
Yeah, because he just, it was a little just jarring, like, versus how the rest of the tribe was working, and everybody wasn't quite ready to. Well, he's on the same tribe as Chris and Dominic, right? Mm-hmm. Or was at that point.
Yeah.
So that was really, you have that weird little power struggle. Those are also two very strong personalities and players that it was going to be very difficult for them, as we've already seen. Like, it's hard for them to like point those guns at each other and get people to like get on board with it. Like, they've been trying, but you've seen more of this collateral damage as they can't quite get that done. And he made more sense as like why he was that, because he was not socially connecting. He was playing harder from a sort of an individual standpoint of, you know, I'm going to go look for the idol, and I'm going through the rice and all this. It just didn't gel with the rest of it. It made him kind of the easy first collateral damage target, you know?
Yeah, I think so too. And like, I know something that, you know, definitely kind of made me raise an eyebrow a little bit is how, when all we had seen so far in terms of other people talking about him is them talking about how he's not really fitting in. And then he was just one of the biggest boosters about saying, oh yeah, we are super united as a tribe. We're all connected. We're so united. And it was just like,
Yeah, he created a punchline that still exists even after he's gone. You know, about, oh, I think we're one of the strongest tribes in Survivor history. And they're like, even his tribe mates are like, okay. And so and the next morning they were like, yeah, we're still working on that, being the strongest tribe. You know? we're still our goal.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really their goal. It was a punchline at that point. So,
and honestly, the ongoing stuff, like, let's see, I guess we're, like he's already does the, the hardcore idol searching even early on, which I think is part of what, people react to. It's a common thing. This is regular. Every season has somebody who is the first to obviously do a lot of idol searching and then attracts attention as a result. I think that's why people get paranoid about not doing it. But, and we get the whole moment where he pours a bunch of the rice into his sock. There's not a clue. And then he pours it back, concluding that had been a stupid idea.
Yes.
And I can just imagine everybody watching the show later and going, you put all of our rice in his sock?
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see. Before the challenge, we also had Wendell making a crab trap and talking about living his passion as a furniture designer. I like him. Although his connection with Dom, like, even if they get along, I can't help but think like Dom's a loose cannon.
Mm-hmm.
He would be a hard person to ally with, I think.
Yeah, I like him, but I'm just because he's interesting, not because I'm like, oh man, this guy is just killing this game. I mean,
well, he hasn't really done much in terms of strategy yet. I just kind of I was moved by his discussion of just, like he has found his passion, his professional passion, and he's following it. And I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. So we get to that first challenge. I love the skulls on the giant puzzle cube. It's somebody from the losing tribe goes to Ghost Island, and we can kind of. I don't even really have very much in the way of notes for it, but Navidi wins the immunity, and already have now recovered the flint that they didn't get from the beginning. But this is the whole bit where Jacob talks about how cohesive the tribe is, and then they send him to Ghost Island, and then he immediately talks about how they fell into his trap. They fell into my trap. I talked to Big Game so that they would send me.
Yeah. I don't know how many times we've had to have this conversation while reviewing this show, but there's just so many times where people just generate, which again is part of social dynamics. I mean, it happens in real life too. It's just hyper focused in here of, oh, I'm going to put the best spin on, like, I see an advantage to them sending me to this so I can go look for an idol. So I'm going to pretend that was my strategy all along because I could tell that they weren't getting along with me.
Well, it's also, there's the element to which if he wasn't fitting in and they're going to go to tribal council, then taking yourself out of the equation by not being available to vote for. I mean,
right. Yeah, that's part of the advantage I was saying, is like not just to be able to look for the idol, but to be also excluded from the vote. Mm-hmm. And the problem with this is that he then decides to start fulfilling that because he sees that as that's like his way to keep going, is like, well, if I just keep being excluded from the vote, then I don't ever go home. And so he does actually start to be more like antagonistic a little bit after he comes back.
Yeah. I mean, it may well have saved him from the first vote. I mean, we actually have, after he gets sent off, Jenna talking about like, well, shoot, we were going to vote for him and now we can't.
I mean, obviously, we don't know how it all played out, but that he was one of the targets because it was an easy first vote, and that we know, that in the beginning, especially when you have no returning players, the people that you go for at the beginning are people are looking for the easiest one because you don't know enough about everybody else. Like, you don't know who's going to be able to help you in the end. So you kind of pick the ones that are like, yeah, this guy doesn't fit in. So it's just like everybody can kind of agree to that and we can live to see another day.
Yeah. So we get to follow him and he's our first exposure to Ghost Island, which is very cool. The one thing that I don't like about it is that 2 out of our first 3 get a thing that say, sorry, you don't get to play a game. Like, that seems like such a dumb decision to me. Like, why would you have any of them say that?
Yeah, I mean, I get that there's the gamble part that they want to have to it, I guess.
Well, but the gamble only happens if you get to play.
Yeah.
2 out of the 3 people who have gone got smashed the urn and they say, sorry, you don't even get to gamble.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, that's right. There is the 2 layers of the gamble.
Yeah.
There's the gamble of basically the roulette of, do you even get to play in the game? Where you maybe won't.
Right. Like, so Jacob found something, but it was 50-50 that he would have found nothing or would have gotten nothing. He would have lost that gamble and lost his vote. But then the subsequent 2 people both got a little note that said, sorry, you're done. Nothing else happens for you. And that just seems such a bizarre decision to me. Now, I can only imagine it's just because they don't want to have too many crazy things in play all at the same time. But I would almost kind of ask, why not? That sounds amazing.
Yeah. I mean, well, and here's my other little conspiracy theory with this, like, even outside of like whether you agree or disagree with the decision, the fact that we got to see it on the very first one, I am convinced that he was going to get to play no matter what. And that there wouldn't have been this like they just put all of those as you get to play the game. And then they started subbing in however many you don't get to play go in. Now it's like how they actually want it.
Yeah.
How dumb would it have been if it was like the other way around? Like, if we were 3 episodes in and it took us till the 3rd episode to even see what happens there.
Yeah. I mean, I think if anything, though, that would have been better in some ways because that would have still kept the suspense of it. Whereas now we know what happens, except that we get to see it not happen twice.
Fair. Yeah.
So I'm just... it seems like a bizarre choice to me to have any of the things say you don't get to play. But hey, whatever. They have their reasons, I'm sure. But
yeah, and I think part of it probably is like you don't want to have a ton of crazy stuff because, for example, there is also crazy stuff at camp. Like, you don't have to be there to get crazy stuff. You can get it at camp. Like, you can get it all over the place. So you got to put some stop gaps into these.
Well, and I suppose it's possible too that in terms of what you can get from your game, maybe they want to have those always be something a little bit more interesting than just an idol, right? Maybe
Yeah,
they want,
because you got the legacy thing.
right.
Yeah.
And so maybe they want all of those to be more unusual than just an idol, and there are fewer of those, and so they have to space them out. Maybe that's why. But even still, I would have argued that they could have instead of just having the gamble ones, like the ones that don't turn into something like that, be nothing. What if it was like food? Like, you get a 50-50 chance of winning some, like a hamburger or something.
Yeah, that's actually a really cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been, I would have liked that.
Yeah. But anyway, we'll see how it develops. But boy, I tell you, if it's going to continue the pattern of 2 out of 3 of those being nothing, I think that's a real mistake.
I mean, I think at some point, like, they're going to just run out of the ones that don't let you play.
Well, right, but it's a little bit like you said, is like, how random is it really?
Yeah,
I don't know. But in any event, I think the whole Ghost Island concept is very cool. And I just hope that it does not have too many more where nobody gets to play, because it's so much more interesting if people get to play. But in any event, Jacob gets the legacy idol advantage, and certainly now that we know the ending of that little subplot, they failed to reverse the curse pretty definitively. He got voted out before he could even contact the person he gave it to, and then she got voted out with it in her pocket.
She was still able to will it on, but
yeah.
So it does still exist, but yeah, it hasn't. It's the 2 people who have had it were the next 2 voted out.
Yeah. So I suppose in particular, it's possible still that it could get willed on to someone who eventually will get to use it in a way that could reverse the curse. But so far, it's not looking good. The 2 people that have had it got voted out in sequence. But that seems like a curse confirmed. Like Mythbusters or something.
Plausible.
In any event. So after that, though, with Jacob over at Ghost Island, then we have, the Malolo tribe needs to vote for someone else out. And the only thing that I honestly, I think, in the tribal council, I think this was a perfect example of one where the editing worked really hard to make it look like it was going to go one way, and then it just went the other way, without really giving us a lot of evidence to support that possibility. I can guess that people thought that Gonzalez was just a little bit, aggressive in terms of her play and personality. I can speculate because we really didn't see it that much. But the one note that I did have that I wrote down and will mention because it's ongoing for Stephanie, but I like the way Stephanie talks, because I think she's a little bit loopy, but the whole bit about her wanting to have the first vote set a tone, and it's this idea of like, well, it's Donathan or Gonzalez, so, he is weak, but maybe we could use him, whereas Gonzalez is a threat. And then Stephanie's like, she is, but is she? I just thought that was funny.
It was
like, I'm going to directly contradict you, but try to phrase it like I'm really just offering a possible alternative perspective. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think, and if there was any, I feel like they were confident going into it, but she certainly did not help her case at Tribal when she decided that she was going to start.
Yeah, she got super paranoid, and the whisper sessions were,
You know, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, that worked for like a season or two, but that's going to start getting really weird for people. Like, Tribal Council, like, there's no confidence until you go there and people start whispering. Like,
well, you know, I think, like, I agree that that's frustrating as a viewer because we want to know what they're saying, you know? But I think in hindsight, that whole thing, she started getting paranoid probably because suddenly the way people had been talking to her back at camp, they're now talking very differently at Tribal Council in a way that was not like some pre-planned thing. And so she was at this point going, wait, what's happening? I need to confirm with everybody. But then I think it was honestly too late by that time.
Yeah.
I think so. That said, like when it was her that went, I was still thinking like the editing did not give us the evidence needed to predict that.
Right.
But anyway, at the very same time, I think that we can probably agree that like her getting voted out did seem to be based on she's playing the game really hard. It feels like she's trying to work us as opposed to building a more genuine, sincere relationship.
Right.
And that seems to be what people were voting for her as a result. But so in the middle, you know, in that second hour, we have Dom awaken paranoid and decides to go idol hunting in the middle of the night and finds it. And it's so dark out, he can't read the note until morning. That's fantastic.
Yes.
I love that. Imagine trying to go back and sleep knowing that the note might say something unexpected.
Right.
Like, this is only half of the idol or something like that.
Yeah, and you've got to go back and find the rest of it. Or
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
man. That's, I really kind of liked that. And I liked, too, he seems like he's one of those sorts of big personalities, plays hard, but he also seems pretty sharp about it in the sense that he's doing interesting things.
Yes, and he's a little, other than like, because he sort of self-generated this, you know, rivalry with Chris.
Yeah.
He's not, you know, he's doing, you know, like if we have to compare to somebody like Russell Hantz, you know, running around looking for idols in the middle of the night, like playing hard, but he has such a more cordial demeanor most of the time that everybody really likes him with the exception of Chris. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to vote for him because he is playing hard, but he hasn't made himself like this just like the target either. Right.
Like, I think, what you said, he self-generated the rivalry, I think is a perfect way to put it, in the sense that, like, there was no rivalry, Dom, until you took it upon yourself, because you can't lie, that you had to point out that you disagreed with Chris's very first decision in the game. You singled yourself out and criticized the guy who was trying to take a leadership position, and now he's gunning for you? Who would have thought? Yeah. I never could have predicted this outcome. And of course, Chris is thinking that Dom's gunning for him because, like,
the guy called him out in front of the entire show.
Yeah. How could you draw any other conclusion? And so for Dom to then go, boy, you know, he's coming after me. I'm like, is he?
Why would he have picked you of all people to single out?
I know. It's crazy, right? Anyway. So I think that, you know, and I like too the little recaps that we get for each of these idols, where we learned, like, okay, this is the one that Andrea was voted out with, for example.
Yeah, it's a sort of fun little, like, it's kind of like the burning of the torches, but longer, farther back, you know?
And I super appreciate them actually showing clips, just because there's going to be lots of cases where just hearing the name, I wouldn't necessarily remember what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see what else we've got. We're not proceeding as quickly through it as I think we had targeted. Not that that's a problem, but
I mean, other than this, yeah, I mean, then
so we have Morgan finding the legacy advantage, and talking about needing a staple gun for her own mouth was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
This is where Jacob, before coming back from Ghost Island, decides to make a fake and not tell anybody about the real thing he found, but to say that he found an idol, which it's a desperation move. I think he realized that he was probably on his way out and probably still will be when he comes back. And so he needed something. But that said, when he's describing it, I was thinking he seems really invested in this idea that he's almost telling the truth.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I was saying is it felt like when he decided that being sent to Ghost Island was actually a good thing strategically because he was on the way out, he started ramping up sort of this bizarre play with the idea that it would either work or get him sent back.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of enabled him to behave a little stranger than even he had been like the days before. That's how I felt, at least. Like, you know, when he sort of said that out loud, or sort of did say that out loud, and he was like, wow, that's a good strategy because now they can't vote me out tonight, and I get to go earn these things.
I think in hindsight, it would have been a smarter play for him to be 100% honest about what happened, up to and including telling everybody who he gave it to.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, look, I mean, this is, first of all, I'm being honest and forthright. I'm telling you guys exactly what happened. You don't have to remember which parts are a lie. Not that it's a terribly complicated story, but you can also kind of pitch this as, look, I don't know anybody over there. It was half arbitrary who I picked, but at the same time, this is a potential future ally that I might have. So if someone wants to be with me, who is someone that has a potential future ally, I mean, I guess that could go both ways, but I think the whole story of an okay looking fake plus no note, and that whole element of if your whole pitch is that you're being 100% honest, but you're not actually being 100% honest, those details matter. So this idea that, oh yeah, there was a note, but I left it there. Again, it's like it doesn't pass the smell test. Like, why? Now, what I thought was what he should have said there was, I didn't bring the note because at first I was considering that I wouldn't tell you guys. And I didn't want the note to be like found on me or spotted or something. So I brought only the idol just because that was the part I needed. But then I decided I wanted to be honest with everybody. I mean, that's maybe what he could have said, but I forgot is obviously he didn't think of that
he really
part
hadn't
of the story.
thought that part through. So
yeah. So in any event, though, he tries to tell them, like, oh yeah, it's an idol, and I'm definitely for sure going to play it this very next time because I don't want to be the guy with the idol who's a target because he has it, and everyone else is thinking, yeah, you were the target anyway. But yeah, Brendan is in particular very sure that the story doesn't make sense. But they decide to try to make him feel comfortable, for one, because it probably keeps him calmer at camp, which makes everything less stressful for everybody else, at least in theory. And if he is so comfortable and it is real, maybe he won't play it after all. And then here's where we have Dom trying to make peace with Chris, because I think maybe he recognized, like, oh, well, this is, I don't want anyone actively gunning for me, so let's try to stop that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the right thing to do, as opposed to just continuing with this sort of arms race against each other as two of the most vocal people on the entire tribe.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we don't need to be doing this since it just didn't, you know, like let's.
Yeah. Now,
because maybe it's contributing to us losing. Like I know they didn't say like all that out loud, but you know, that's part of it is like they wanted to get some unity going. They want to get the culture better. At least Dominic did. And
right.
I thought it was the exact right thing to do. At the same time, like, I don't like Chris as much as him because I feel like Chris is being a little stubborn, but I don't not understand why Chris is being stubborn about it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't agree with it.
It's suspicious. It's like, you know, you rubbed me the wrong way on purpose in a proactive way on the first day at the beach. And now I'm suspicious of your motives. Now here's something that Dom did that I think is fascinating, but dubious strategically, which is to say he has a real idol, but he decides to make a fake and wrap it up in the real note and tell Chris he has the idol. Now, I guess the idea being, in theory, can say, we're sharing this idol now, and if you need it, I'll give it to you. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Right. And then he could have given it to him, and Chris could not be able to use it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of fun. But unfortunately, it, again, a little bit like with Jacob, although I think a little bit more skillfully executed. But even still, even with the real note, Chris just can't help but say something doesn't feel right about this. This doesn't feel like a genuine offer. It feels like a trick somehow. And I'm not sure what that trick is. It clearly has a real note. But what's going on? I don't trust this. And, you know, again, we know that even as much as I kind of like Dom and I don't like, I mean, it's not that I dislike Chris as much as he hasn't really given me any particular reason to like him either. But he's right to not trust, you know, his instincts are right on this, right? Is that it's not a genuine offer because Dom is trying to set him up with a fake idol. So that makes this whole peace offer kind of tainted.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So this is where we get the water obstacle course. And I think, you know, we talked a little bit already about the whole bit with Donathan. And I kind of like James generally, but at the same time, while it's certainly obvious why he would feel bad about his performance in this challenge, because he really did kind of lose you know, as much as you always want to say in a team challenge, you know, it's not one person, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I started to not really like him after this, and you know.
Is it just because he was opposed to Morgan, you think, or?
No. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Before I even knew that was going to be an issue, I was sort of just frustrated by his sort of just the way he came apart a little bit. And
well, I'll agree with that. That's kind of what I was going to get at, is that I sort of feel like I want to like him, but he needs to get over that loss. I mean, you know, he's obviously embarrassed about it, and you know, that's a reasonable reaction, but it's also not helpful to hold on to it for too long. But in any event, you know, let's see, but yeah, Navidi wins again. And I couldn't help but note that in the sort of finishing celebration there, Donathan's voice is his accent is so thick that they gave him subtitles.
That is funny. I didn't pay attention to that, but I
could
see it. Yeah.
I mean, he was basically just saying something to the effect of like, "Oh yeah, you know, it was hard, but I'm, proud of myself. That's something to that effect. But it was just like he's just so Southern. They had to give him subtitles. But in any event, we have, let's see. Donathan is chosen to go to Ghost Island for reasons that are not really made clear, but whatever. Jacob says he had hoped to be sent again, but he's going to try and use his fake idol to take control.
Yeah, see, I think that was the other thing that sort of bugged me about him, which is the same as what you were talking about earlier with him always continuing to say, like, the tribe is, the strongest tribe ever, and God, we have so much unity. It was the same thing with this, where he's like, take control. Like, dude, you just need to serve. Like, you just need to get through the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
Like, you're not taking control of anything. Like, why does it have to go so far that way? Just.
Yeah, this is a read the room problem, I think. That Jacob's kind of playing an abstract game instead of the one that he's in.
Yeah.
In any event, let's see. We get back at the camp, James is, he's doing the whole thing of like, I'm gonna be so negative about my own performance that I will out negative any of you, so you don't say anything bad about me because I've already said worse. He's doing that thing. Not that it's not sincere, but that's definitely what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. So Brendan and most of the rest of the group, they're trying to just hope that if Jacob does have a real idol, that he doesn't play it. But then they talk about throwing some votes at James, just sort of in case it turns out that Jacob does have a real idol.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit where Stephanie is kind of forming sort of a weird flirty sort of little alliance with him, except that we can't help but think like, is that, is there, how much of that is the plan of let's try to make him feel comfortable? She talks about this idea that like, well, but he does trust me, which could make him a useful ally. And then she actually does talk with Jenna this idea like, is this something we ought to consider, that he would be loyal to us? And I not that it's nice to say about Jacob necessarily, but I did kind of like Jenna's sort of matter of fact, yeah, but I don't think he's that smart. He's not gonna be a good ally because he's gonna screw something up.
Yeah. True.
Yeah. We have Laurel feeling a little bit like an outsider too, and so in some ways she's seeing Jacob and James made to feel like an outsider, and so she kind of relates to that. And so there's some stuff that they give us to make it seem like, well, maybe it could be something else might happen. But at the we get to the tribal council, Jacob's story of Ghost Island and the quote information imbalance. I was kind of charmed by Jacob talking about how everyone else is talking about my glass half full approach, and I'm saying, God, no, it's not true. I'm a neurotic, paranoid indoor kid. And at the same time that like, yeah, that rings true, but you are also the one who is still also trying to speak for the whole group about how unified you all are. So you really are kind of doing both. Like, don't tell us that, like, you're essentially what you're doing is, I'm going to be super positive all the time, but also tell you all that it's just an act. It kind of doesn't work.
Yeah, the whole thing was odd. Like, just as like we've talked about. So
yeah, and we actually get to the point where just before the votes, Brendan and Michael whisper that they think, like, I think we're getting set up. But then it turns out, no, not really so much. So we get one vote for Michael and 2 for James, but the rest of these votes are for Jacob. And honestly, I was a little bit disappointed only just because I felt like the more interesting outcome would be if he had pulled it off, his little plan of having the outsiders unite. You know what I mean? I feel like if that had worked, that would have been more interesting than what happened. But obviously it didn't work. So
yeah, I mean, it was doomed. I mean, he wasn't good enough to get that to work, and he'd been playing the game differently up until that point. You know, like he didn't have any leverage with him. Like he had no gravitas at all, because his whole, like you said, his whole point was to play the game like I'm super positive, but it's all an act. And they also see that, oh, well, you're also not 100% honest about what's going on. And, oh, well, that's also part of my game, is to sort of not be 100% honest. Like, how do you then go and like motivate a bunch of people to do your plan? Like that's just, you're at that point, you're at the end of that. So
yeah, he really just never found his footing. His gameplay was kind of flailing right from the get-go.
Yeah. And I wanted to like him, but I don't. I mean, he never did anything that made me really root for him, and I
think he's
why he was the guy they chose. You know,
he's superficially enough like Seth Rogen that I think we get a little bit of a contact baggage, endearing quality about him.
That's
you know
fair.
What I mean? Like, you feel like rooting for him is a little bit like Seth Rogen, and we like Seth Rogen, right? He's a funny guy. But then it's like, oh, but I guess he's kind of like Seth Rogen, but not actually Seth Rogen. Anyway, although I wouldn't necessarily tell him to lean away from that comparison, because I think it kind of works. Like, to the extent that I liked him was when he was more like that. Anyway, so that was the end of the first two. So let's get to this past week's. We had the roller coaster ride of Tribal. James is getting reassurance from everyone that, like, despite the fact that he got a couple of votes, having a couple of people tell him, is like, listen, stop apologizing about that challenge, because we already didn't vote you out for it, so we don't want to hear about it anymore. And it's like, it's absolutely a thing where you can feel like you need to prove it to yourself, but it's to yourself, not to us. So stop talking about it, is kind of the subtext, I think, there. Probst totally trolls everybody by making everyone say how much they like their current tribes before making them switch, which was pretty funny. It occurs to me also that the whole get your first look at the new blank tribe is kind of complicated when they haven't brought the person back from Ghost Island yet. Because the other tribe wouldn't necessarily know who got sent to Ghost Island. So there would be two people missing.
Well, I thought the other tribe is who sent people to Ghost Island.
Is it? I feel like it's been complicated a couple of times. Just realized there's a screw coming out of my chair here. Pulling a couple of them.
Yeah, like, so even in this one, so remember after they mixed up, like, this is a good example. So they mixed up and they had to unanimously decide who would go, but there were dissenting voices because there were people who knew.
Right. This time it was the winning tribe that got to decide, but I think last time it was not. I don't know. I remember it being explicitly a little bit confused about it, but I thought that
Naviti was the tribe that was winning all the time at the beginning, right?
Correct.
And Malolo had to go to Ghost Island.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia recap, and in both of them it says Naviti had to send one person there.
Okay, so maybe you're right then. Then in which case,
but I think what was made it explicitly confusing is I think they were making. I felt like they were making a case for who they wanted to go or something. There was something that, because you're right, because it made sense, like Jacob's argument of like why he was doing all of this stuff, so that he would get chosen.
Because the first time when he got picked, it was his tribe that did it. Yeah.
So, but it was a little confusing. You're right. Yeah. So,
I mean, it might be that it is actually always the winning tribe that gets to decide, but they've not made it super clear that that's what's happening.
Right. Yeah.
But in any event, we have the new mix-up. So the new tribes are, the new Navidi is Dominic, Donathan, Libby, Laurel, Morgan, James, Angela, Wendell, Chris. And then the new Malolo and the Orange Buffs, Desiree, Sebastian, Stephanie, Michael, Brendan, Jenna, Killen, Bradley, and Chelsea. We've got a couple of people in there that we haven't really heard anything from so far, like Chelsea. But
just even when you say it.
Yeah. Well, and then Bradley, we got a little bit in this episode, which was mostly that he thinks his new camp sucks and complains about it all the time. It's apparently his thing. That's all we know about him so far. But we get more candy talk from Sebastian, where Sebastian is talking about how he is so happy about being at this great camp and all his allies are here. So he is Laffy Taffy right now, banana flavored. And I thought that was, it's like he likes candy. I hope he talks about candy every episode. In any event, a lot of the newcomers to this camp are not impressed with the shelter. Brendan is annoyed by all the complaints, especially as like, yeah, the tribe that had all the tools had a nicer shelter than the tribe that didn't have all the tools. What do you know? You don't have to keep complaining about it. Although it seemed like they were also complaining that the actual campsite was much less. One campsite was much nicer than the other, just in terms of the location. Like nicer beach, nicer scenery.
I sort of wrote off all of this just because it seemed like a bunch of complaining, and I didn't.
Yeah.
So I don't. Yeah, my notes and my memory of like how this all came down, they're just not there because
they've done that in past seasons where they've explicitly made one campsite nicer than the other, but
this didn't feel like that. It just felt like a bunch of people complaining.
Yeah, we're certainly not being shown, evidence of that, right?
No, we don't see like, oh man, this beach, we can't get things because our beach sucks. No,
right.
Like Brendan, I think it was, who said that, yeah, the tribe with all the tools built the better shelter. Like,
mm-hmm. Well, and then like Bradley also was complaining a lot, like, because there was even the scene later where they're talking about the beautiful sunrise, and they're saying, it's like, how do you ever get tired of that? And he just says, I'm fucking freezing. I don't think he actually, they bleeped out that. I don't know if he actually said it, but that was the general impression.
Yes, it was just annoying.
Yeah. So meanwhile, at the Navidi camp, it's the reverse, because all the people who are coming from the more meager shelter now have the nice one. It's like, oh yeah, isn't this great? And Chris talks about the awkward situation of like, technically speaking, we have the 5 over the 4, but of this 5, 3 of them are the ones that I would kind of not have been as close to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's talking about. So he goes and tells Angela about Dom's idol, wants to blindside Dom. And this is where he is again. It's like he is kind of showing his true colors in terms of he's kind of pushy about wanting to tell everybody else what to do. And Angela even explicitly talks about having been in the military. And it's like, I'm used to giving orders, but, getting orders. But, there's a time and a place for that. And right now I don't appreciate it.
Yep.
And so Chris is telling everybody about Dom's idol too. Wants to target him. Got to make it happen. Libby kind of nods and smiles. And explicitly talks about nodding and smiling. Stephanie.
Well, not in a smiled her way to voting exactly with them. So.
Yeah. Let's see, Stephanie is talking about, agrees that there's lots of complainers, but she wants to find a crack in that group. She's like, could she and Jenna do something? Well, they decided not to save Jacob last time. But all of the old Malolos decide to go idol hunting. The other 5 are kind of saying, this could not have worked out more perfectly. We're pretty much just in a good spot to, do what we want, and they're fun to talk to while we vote them out. But then Michael finds the idol, James's idol from Survivor China, as previously discussed. And then over at Navidi, we have Dom and Morgan are, wanting to get rid of Chris. And they're pretty adamant about that. So they want to persuade people to vote against him. I would have guessed that it would work. We saw Chris actually, rubbing a couple people the wrong way about that. Libby bonds with Morgan over Catholicism, but apparently not enough to to vote with her. And so that brings us up to the immunity challenge, which is another big obstacle course with some fun stuff. Another puzzle, the big Moai head puzzle, which is, a fun visual.
Yeah, it was a cool little tiki head or whatever the thing was.
Yeah. And I liked one of the things I was really noticing this time is just how it feels like these early challenges are really taking advantage of the size of the tribes that they still have. They're designing big things that need everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like carrying and holding that ladder that they have to climb, like while it's supported by just people.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been fun, because I think we've talked before when they've recycled just stuff they knew would work and put it in new and interesting ways. Like I feel like they're now actually creating new ideas that still use the principles that make the challenges interesting. So
yeah. So let's see.
And by the way, the little jumping thing between the raised ramps, that looked like Ninja Warrior stuff, basically.
Yeah.
They took something from another successful challenge show,
I watched that one and I was just looking at that one and going like, I feel like I would break my leg trying to do that. Anyway, so it was pretty close leading up to, the puzzle, but then Malolo just blasts through it. Bradley and Kellen do a great job with the puzzle, and so they win for Malolo. And here's where we had, as you mentioned previously, the discussion of they need a unanimous, but they can't agree because of the 5-4 split. So they go to rocks, which just randomly ends up being Chris going to Ghost Island. And I can't help but think that if he had not been the one to go, it maybe could have played out differently, just because I think that
I 100% think it would have, because I think if he and Dom both still existed, I think that this was when it was going to come to a head, because he wasn't going to let it go. I mean, he even said, like, oh, I hope they keep, like, the momentum to get rid of Dom without me there. And it was James's whole, like, oh, well, yeah, I see why we want to do that, but Dom showed us an idol, and he might have a real idol, and went through that whole piece. Like, I don't know that Chris, like, lets that happen. I think he's trying to figure out a way to get rid of Dom and trying to get enough people on his side to, blindside him or to split votes. And in doing so, he probably puts the target on himself. And I feel like he then leaped. I feel like Chris would have gotten voted out because he would not have let this Dom thing go. And I think it's going to be a problem going forward for him.
Yeah. Well, because, Dom's problem ultimately was that he didn't really he didn't have like an enemy alliance to fight against. He had one guy that is now not available as a target anymore. Right. But because he actually does have an idol, plus everybody thinks he has an idol, which is slightly more complicated than normal, in the sense that they think he has an idol, but there's something fishy about it. which is correct that it's fishy, but he also has a real one. So, but in any event, that's why they feel like they can't necessarily vote for him, because he might just turn, play an idol and screw everything up. So now it's and plus it's a potential 4-4 tie now with with Chris having been gone. So it's Dom versus Libby, maybe. And then Wendell doesn't want to draw rocks, which again is like, yeah, who would want to draw rocks? You don't want to draw rocks. That's a terrible way to go into a tribal council.
Right. It's one thing to draw rocks to, like, go silent. It's another thing to draw rocks to, like, go home. Like, that's
right.
Especially if you can make a decision that requires that to not happen. You can confirm that you will live another day versus, like, dig in on this thing.
Right.
Especially this early on, like, you just need to make it.
So Wendell talks about the possibility of taking out Angela as sort of a way to get to Chris, since Chris isn't available. But I think that probably anything about Chris that might have had people vote against him doesn't really apply to Angela. Like, especially since we know Angela, despite, actually voting for Chris, has also been occasionally irritated by him. So she's not really the hardcore Chris ally that it would feel good to vote her out. So even though she still got 3 votes as the target, I think there's not the same enthusiasm for voting her out as there would have been for Chris.
Right.
So I thought that it was a pretty genius move for Dom to take his fake idol and show it, and he's now taken the fake idol, taken it out of the real idol note and put it with a tree mail note, and decided to make everyone else think that Chris is crazy by saying, look, this is what I showed him, and he thinks it's real, but it's actually fake. And I thought that was hilarious, but I think unfortunately he's just not as good a liar as he maybe thinks he is, because you still had a couple of people saying, what makes more sense here? That he's trying to trick us into thinking he doesn't have an idol? Or maybe he really, maybe that's, he's tricking us because he really does have an idol. So it's a weird, complicated thing where he got what he wanted kind of because they didn't believe him, which is a weird sort of, it's like backfiring into a score. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a weird, complicated situation. But I like that he's doing interesting, proactive things like that.
That part's all fun, but it's.
Yeah. But like just the fact that James saw this whole story and said, something about this doesn't feel right. Therefore, I'm going to conclude that he does actually have a real idol, and therefore we shouldn't vote for him, or we can't just vote for him without some kind of a split, because otherwise, he gets to pick who goes.
Right.
And so then in tribal council, we get one of the more sort of transparently political tribal councils in a while, in the sense where everybody is trying to keep up this facade of the 4-4 split, almost everybody anyway. And when we know that it's actually not accurate at all, like it fell apart almost immediately in terms of the real situation, but lots of people kind of trying to still keep up that pretense.
And Probst, of course, he just has no tolerance for that. And it was like, well, this doesn't sound like you guys are really, this sounds nothing like a 4-4 split. Yeah.
And, given that we weren't necessarily happy to see Morgan get voted out, for her to get voted out immediately following this whole bit where Libby is kind of cheerfully explaining the need for, like, well, sometimes in a game like this, you have to lie. And so maybe I'm lying. And then Morgan is actually just like, but look at her. Don't you just want to believe her?
Right, because Morgan thought she was lying to someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so poor Morgan, like, because again, it's like nobody was even really trying to target her. She's kind of just got chosen by default, and it's unfortunate, but she got chosen because they didn't feel like they could vote for Dom, who is who they really wanted to vote for, but he might have an idol. So like, who else instead? Well, Morgan.
Right. It literally became, well, it has to be Morgan or Wendell. And I don't even remember what their weird, like their sort of default reasoning of like why it couldn't be Wendell. Right. I mean, it was just, again, it was like Wendell was like plan B, but Morgan was A. And so they just went with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, yeah. So it was frustrating. I'd like to see her again. Just because, again, I probably paid more attention to her early on than a normal contestant, just because of my sister's relationship with her. But I thought she really seemed to have all of the tools that you need in the toolkit to be really good at this game. And I'd just like to see it have another shot. So
yeah.
But I remain interested in the other people. Like, it's not like she was the only person that was interesting. And the mechanisms are cool once we start to see them actually get to use the Ghost Island stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the one thing I guess I didn't cover in my notes, I kind of skipped over it, is that talking about Chris at Ghost Island, how he gets emotional thinking about his mom in terms of like trying to be strong for other people, which actually like I found that a little bit like it explained some of his posturing. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting to see that there's kind of a vulnerability being hidden and compensated for in some of that stuff.
It layered him a little more.
Yeah. It definitely provides some nuance to my feelings about him, but at the same time, I would kind of almost still say, yeah, dude, you should work on that.
Yep.
Because you're right now, the compensating is kind of off-putting. It's one thing to be strong for people. It's another thing to, be bossy in the attempt to be strong.
Correct.
But anyway, though, we'll see how he develops as he comes back. Next time we see, lots of idol sharing. And I had a note just to say Morgan failed to reverse the curse of the legacy idol. So did Jacob, for that matter. But then, as you pointed out, it does still get passed on to somebody. So maybe someone will actually get to use it.
Maybe something will happen with it, or maybe not. Yeah,
maybe not. We'll see. It kind of ended up being moot the last time.
Yep.
But in any event, we shall see. So we're going to try to be on a more regular schedule for the season as we progress. But it's always, of course, subject to the whims of the universe.
Yes.
But thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. And we'll be back for episode 4 of Survivor Ghost Island.
Thanks.